afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone this afternoon to Stepping into Advocacy. My name is Megan Rolf. I work at Winthrop University, and I'm also a government relations co-chair on the board here at NACAC. I started my advocacy work in South Carolina by attending legislative days and serving as a state chair prior to joining the board.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elena Ornelas, and in my day-to-day work, I work at Vanderbilt University as an associate director. And like Megan, I also started off with my legislative activities here in Tennessee through the legislative days that they hosted, and have served on the SACAC board in the government relations co-chair role for the last 3 years.
And I am David Hawkins, Chief Education and Policy Officer with NACAC. And I am very pleased to be able to be here to join Maria and Megan to talk to you a little bit about advocacy. I've been at NACAC for 21 years and was originally hired to be the Director of Government Relations. So advocacy is near and dear to my heart. And I'm happy to have been witness to many of you coming through Washington, and also having participated in a number of SACAC events over the years. Love seeing the kind of energy and participation and engagement that advocacy brings. So unless Megan or Maria, you have any housekeeping general announcements to make, we can, if you do, we can pause. If not, we can jump into the start of the presentation.
I will just note that we do have the Q&A feature. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, we will either address those throughout the presentation or towards the end if we have a few minutes extra.
Excellent. Well, maybe let's go to the first slide, I suppose, or the second slide, technically speaking. This is just a slide with an assortment of pictures that is not going to capture the depth and breadth of what advocacy can mean. But I put it out there because this does illustrate a number of the ways in which we do think about advocacy. I think when I tell people that I do advocacy work for a living, and even when I talk to folks in NACAC about advocacy, the place that it always starts is government relations. And that is a pretty obvious and logical starting point. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But what I'm going to talk about today, even though we are going to focus a bit on policy work, I do want to emphasize that advocacy is a big field. There are almost an infinite number of ways to advocate, starting right from what you do on a day-to-day basis, which is you advocate pretty much every day in your job. You might tell somebody what you need. You might talk about a challenge that you're facing. You might be working with a student who you really feel has a great shot at being achieving every success in life. So you're going to really push for that student in the college admission process. There's all sorts of different ways that you advocate. And just like there are different ways that you advocate on your job, there's different ways to advocate professionally and for policy and other ends. Generally speaking, I think what we at NACAC look at is certainly the legislative policy realm. There are state issues that we have to pay attention to, and there are issues here in Washington that we have to pay attention to. And we'll talk a little bit about those during the presentation today. There are also just issues out there that we find ourselves caught up in that might not be specific to college admission counseling, but that might affect either our students or us or both in some way, shape, or form. A lot of the issues that we end up taking on here at NACAC may not have a point of origin in education, but they definitely affect education. You think about a lot of the civil rights conversations that we have, LGBTQ student issues, which have been very salient in state legislative issues, in state legislative sessions for the last several years to almost a decade now. A lot of them have been focused on schools. And when you start thinking about these civil rights issues, they very quickly start to find their way into each, sort of professional area. So we talk about issues that are bigger than us. We talk about issues that are in our bailiwick. And then I think another way that we talk about issues is that we talk about our own practices. So this graphic here in front of us that says test optional means test optional. This is something that I think, when we first started this campaign last year, we felt like, yeah, test optional means test optional. Of course it does. But the more we hear about students and families just not believing that colleges are test optional, we hear the questions that are out there, we realize, there really is going to require a lot of conversation about this issue particularly, but also just issues in general, to ensure that everybody understands what we're talking about. And that's fundamentally what advocacy is you're trying to get across a point to a larger group of people or a different group of people, a general point about something. And oftentimes it has to do with either a challenge that you're facing, or it can have to do with something you just want to make sure everybody knows about in the case of this test optional campaign. As you can see on this slide, I've included pictures of some of the issues we advocate for. There's a DREAM Act banner there flying over one of the Capitol office buildings. NACAC certainly has been engaged in the conversation about undocumented students for going on 30 years now. It certainly even precedes my tenure here at NACAC. We have a new administration in town, of course, and so we have been working very hard to try to ensure that our issues are among those that are addressed during the first 100 days. And I'm very pleased to report that of the list of issues we sent over to the Biden administration, those that they have taken care of all of the ones that they have actual authority to take care of. So they've been moving at a blinding speed, and the ability for us just to articulate, hey, these are the things that we care about and the things that you might want to pay attention to. That's part of advocacy too. You see, of course, the picture there from Washington, D.C. Ordinarily, we'd be bringing our members to Washington to advocate around this time of year, another casualty of the pandemic. But we certainly, one of the ways in which we advocate at NACAC is we try to connect our members to their elected officials. And that's something we'll talk about today on both the state and federal levels. And then finally, I have a map there of Florida. And for those of you who haven't seen this type of map yet, this is a map of school districts in each state, and it's color coded to show the student to counselor ratios in each school district. And red is bad, unfortunately. Red it represents districts that have more than 500 students per counselor. Green is where you'd have fewer than 250 students per counselor. So we try to not only do we try to advocate for counselors, but we also try to illustrate to the public, to the media, to legislators, just how difficult some of our challenges are. And I think this is one way in which we try to visually show people, this is what counseling looks like in this case, the state of Florida. So there's tons of ways to advocate, tons of entry points. I'll stress right off the bat that all of these forms of advocacy have one thing in common. Maybe they have more than one thing in common, but they have at least one thing in common, and that is that you are the expert. Oftentimes when we start talking about advocacy, we start thinking, oh my gosh, I have to know all of the laws that are on the books. I have to know all of the data. I have to know all. That's just not the case. You know what you do on a day-to-day basis. You know the challenges you face. You know the challenges your students face, your institutions and schools. That's what makes you an expert. And that's what makes you a good advocate. If you can effectively say, these are the challenges that my students, my schools face. And you don't always even have to have the solutions. It sometimes helps to have some ideas, but just being able to identify, hey, this is a problem. We can't deal with more than 500 students effectively. We can't. That's the kind of thing that it's just literally impossible to do. Those are the kinds of things that make you an effective advocate. So one of the things that you'll notice as I go through my subsequent slides here is that we talk about the things we know. And as an individual, if you were to advocate to anyone, to a member of the media, to a legislator, you would be talking about the things that you face on the job and that you can see plainly right in front of you. That's the way NACAC makes policy, believe it or not, that we take our collective experiences and we scale it up and we say, what are the things our members have the most experience with, and what are their pain points, and how do we articulate those to the audiences that we're trying to reach? And so you'll see that in some of our subsequent slides, and I promise I'll spend a little less time on each slide than on this one. But I do want to give you a couple stories that really illustrate how advocacy can just work almost at random. There was a Capitol Hill visit back in 2001, so right after I first started at NACAC, and it was with Senator Voinovich, a Republican from Ohio. And it specifically was with his staff member, his education staff member. And the NACAC members from Ohio walked into that office, and And wouldn't you know it, but one of the NACAC members represented a high school where this education aide happened to have attended when he went to high school. And his counselor, unfortunately, had just recently passed away, and he didn't know that yet, and the counselor bonded with him. The counselor that went into the office bonded with him. And on the basis of that connection, he agreed. He said, I'll champion this issue that you all want, which is to include counselors in federal professional development programs under our Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And Senator Voinovic's office championed that provision all the way through to the signing of the bill. And we were able to get school counselors eligible for professional development assistance under that bill. And it all started with that personal connection. Another story that illustrates how advocacy works. There was a congressman from Pennsylvania who has since retired. And our Pennsylvania affiliate went in to meet with him. And all they wanted to do was say, here's who we are. This is who PACAC is in this case, and here's who we as individuals are. We can help you with things like college nights if you want to do something for your constituents, something nonpartisan, not even policy related. So he took a bump on it. They did a college admission and financial aid night, the PACAC in this congressional office, and that led to a series of connections, not just with the congressman who we helped pass 2 different bills. It also his staff, who eventually went on to other positions, kept coming back to NACAC, kept coming back to our members for expertise. So the mere fact that they had said, look, let us do a college night for you, blossomed into a relationship even to this day is still bearing fruit, even though the congressman has long since retired. So just a couple of examples of how really advocacy is all personal. And it starts there and it ends there. So that's what I wanted to get across to you. As you listen to us talk today, I want you to realize advocacy is for you. You may think you can't do it, or maybe you're a little nervous about it, but you absolutely, if I can do it, you can do it. So just even though I'm paid to do it, even though I've been doing it for a very long time, there was a time when I was intimidated like you wouldn't believe at the prospect of doing this work. But here I am probably 30 years later, having now done it as a career, and I can say anyone can do it. So with that as a starting point, let's go on to the next slide. And what I want to do is talk to you a little bit about how we develop our policy priorities, and then we'll move into the remainder of the presentation. Last year, we convened an ad hoc committee on leadership in college admission. And the report that they put out was a broader report that focused on NACAC and a lot of things that we have to focus on. But one specific outgrowth of the report was this roadmap for change. And I actually am going to put the link into the chat right now. So if you haven't seen this report, feel free to go and take a look at it. But basically what this does is it takes everything that NACAC is as an organization, which is an accumulation of all that you all are and all that our members have put into us over the years. And it essentially gives us a policy framework. I'll just really quickly go through that. We hold students' interests as primary. That's kind of where NACAC operates. The interest of the student is primary. So that's one of our policy compass points. We also believe in transparency. If you're familiar with our code of ethics, which is now a guide to ethical practices in college admission, transparency is a big issue for us. We also want to promote education as a public good. I think one of the things that we really struggle with is that a lot of the specific policy proposals that we're going to talk about in a minute could be solved if we just invested more in higher education as a public good. And so we want to keep that as sort of a North Star, even if we can't get there tomorrow. That's something we really want to focus on in the long term. Obviously, inequities are a big problem for us. We see it all the time, whether we're counselors, admission officers, college advisors. You see the inequities every day. So we always have to be focused on resolving inequities really right from the start. We're born into inequity in this country, and we need to focus on that, and we need to focus on K-12 inequities and then get to the higher ed space as well. We want to protect student rights. Again, we acknowledge, just for our reason for being as NACAC, that there needs to be some rules about how we conduct ourselves. And a lot of that has to do with protecting the interests of students. So we want that to be another piece of our framework. And then finally, we believe in fully funding public higher education. And again, this is almost a summary point to the point about education being a public good, about inequities, about the fact that students' interests are primary. If we don't fully fund higher education, particularly at the public level, we're going to continue to evolve into this place where higher education is a private good, and it gets more expensive and more expensive, and we provide less aid and less aid. So these are the big sort of points that we use to shape our policy, and it provides us a structure within which we can evaluate different bills to be able to see if these bills are worth our support or opposition or what have you. So with that, maybe we'll move to the next slide. This basically, when you take that big framework and you try to put it into a little bit more manageable boxes, this is again where you can really see who we are as a profession, as opposed to an association. We have to strive for equity in education. So when we look at policy related to secondary or post-secondary education, we want to make sure we're in the business of resolving inequities. The second, and basically what this does is, this is our formula for improving college access and success in this country. So at the state and federal level, these are going to be the objectives we use. If the big things are goals, these are going to be kind of our objectives. So equity in education is number one. Increasing funding to hire, train, and equip school counselors and college advisors. That's key. If you go back to that map of Florida, we need more bodies in the schools to help our kids with the nuts and bolts of how to go to college. We can prepare them all we want academically, but if they don't have support and assistance through the process of transitioning, a lot of students will fall out of the pipeline. And that's something we know for a fact. We support need-based financial aid for college, including for undocumented students. We know, again, you can prepare students academically, you can help them through the transition, but if they get that financial aid award package and it's not enough for them to go, they fall out of the pipeline. So we think this public support for need-based financial aid is so critical. And then finally, we want to protect students from predatory recruitment and lending practices. It's a jungle out there for a lot of students. And as much as we like to think of higher education and education writ large as an endeavor that people can trust, there are actors out there who will take advantage of students. And we have to make sure that our policy protects students and taxpayers from those predatory institutions. So we go to the next slide. So if the big framework was goals, if the last slide was objectives, this is our strategies. This is what we ask specifically of, in this case, for Congress. So this is the 117th Congress here in DC. And this is actually an excerpt from a document that we have on our Advocacy Day, Advocacy Week website. And I will actually copy and paste this link into the chat here so that you can see this document once we're done here. This is just a list. You can see the blue headers there are the objectives that we just went over. And these little bullet points are the very specific asks that we're making of Congress this year. And with each state, when we do state advocacy, we try to do something similar, because not all of these issues are going to translate to the state level. So we try to put our strategies out there so that when you give something to, say, a member of Congress or their staff, they'll actually say, oh, okay, here are some of the solutions. Now, in some cases, for issues that we may not have considered in depth, we may not have a solution. The ask that we have may simply to be, bring this thing up. We need hearings on this. We need to gather more information. But for these 4 objective areas, we have some very specific asks, and I won't read through all of them. But let's just pick on one. One being the fact that there is an actual bill. You see HR 614 right under the school counselors area that would actually provide money to hire, train, and equip school counselors. And I've pasted the action alert for that bill in the chat there. That's something we want to see passed. So when you hand this sheet over to a member of Congress, they'll be able to see, oh, well, if I want to help support school counselors, I can go and co-sponsor HR 614. And that's the level that we like to be able to sometimes provide. But one of the important things that I want to tell you today is that you don't need to know all of this right off the bat. If you go in and you say, I'm a school counselor, we need help, or I'm a college admission officer and I want to advocate on behalf of my school counseling colleagues, all you have to know is, hey, I've got a great organization or organizations in SACAC and NACAC that you can talk to. We can get you some bills and stuff and ideas and legislative language to support. So that kind of takes you through the framework, the objectives, and the goals. We'll go to the next slide really quickly, and I'm just going to maybe rehash some ways in which we we coach folks to advocate. The first is, again, connecting with elected officials. You know, you may or may not be comfortable with that. That's certainly where SACAC and NACAC can help you. You know, either scheduling meetings, getting used to talking to legislators. Also, I mentioned the action alert that I put in the chat. That's a way to engage through NACAC and SACAC, because we do action alerts pretty regularly. And as I mentioned earlier, doing some college access services. You know, if you get to know a legislator, chances are they're going to really need your expertise. You know, they like to provide information for their constituents, and whether it's through you, through SACAC or NACAC, we might be able to help them provide information about the college admission process. And then down below, probably most of you are engaged in social media. Clearly, there's a lot of advocacy going on there, and if you look at the NACAC Wonk account, you will see a lot of policy information coming out through that. Certainly tagging your members of Congress, your elected officials, even the media. Those are really helpful strategies. And then finally, you know, people often will tag reporters in their tweets. They'll write letters to the editor, op-eds. Of course, blogs and new media present a whole new facet of advocacy that we never really had before. So if you really feel strongly about an issue, and I want to stress that you don't have to know all of the issues either. If you feel passionate about one, pick that one and go for it. So if you want to, you know, go deep on an issue, if you just want to express your views, those are some really great ways to get the word out. And then we'll just go wind up with the last slide here, because I realize I'm just a tiny bit over. This week does happen to be NACAC Advocacy Week. So the whole week, actually, there are things to do. And I'm going to paste one more. Nope, I'm sorry. I already pasted the Advocacy Day, Advocacy Week link earlier. I'm going to paste an action alert here. There's a whole bunch of ways in which you can get involved. Social media, action alert. Tomorrow is our Advocacy Day. I'm going to use quotes because we're usually in DC visiting members of Congress in person, but the pandemic has scuttled that. And unfortunately, we are overlapping with this conference. But the good news is we're recording everything we do tomorrow. So if you're really interested in this, you will be able to go back and look, particularly if you're already registered. If you registered for the NACAC conference in the fall, you can get all of this content, no problem. If you want to see it, it's pretty easy to get it, even if you're not registered. So if you go to that Advocacy Day link that I posted a little earlier, you'll see that. So with that, I realized that was a bit of a hurricane, but I wanted to give you the really quick rundown of what life is like at NACAC with advocacy, and would just encourage you to all get involved. I think, Megan, you're up next, and I'll transfer it over to you and be available for questions later on.
Thanks, David. You know, I kind of want to talk a little bit more about what David said about advocating in your backyard. As I mentioned before, I mean, my advocacy efforts started in the state of South Carolina by attending legislative days and then later becoming a chair, a state chair in South Carolina. But, you know, at a conference years ago, I asked one of my mentors, I said, you know, how can I get more involved? How can I make a bigger impact? And he responded to me by starting in my own backyard. And, you know, that really resonated with me. You know, I think that advocacy is the easiest way to make a difference. You know, advocating for your students and giving them a voice. But I think oftentimes, as you know, David touched on, people are intimidated. I know I was very nervous when I first started meeting with legislators in their offices, but I think they think advocacy and they think lobbying and they think politicians and government and get kind of turned off and don't really want to get involved in that. But, you know, I really can't reiterate enough how important it is to be included in the conversation because these decisions are being made and we want them to be in our students' best interests and the best interest in the work that we do. Particularly when, you know, David talks about our core principles. Everybody feels passionately about at least one of them, but probably all of them. And that's why we do this work. You know, when you think about, you know, providing rigorous curriculum to all of our students, and you know how we have thousands of undocumented students in our high schools, but most of us live in states that do not provide them with need-based aid. You know, providing our students with protections from being preyed upon in the recruitment process. I know the biggest barrier I see with my students is college affordability. So of course, you know, supporting need-based financial aid and the Pell Grant is crucial to them attending college. You know, supporting our school counselors, of course, is another big one. And, You know, David talked in the first slide about this teacher ratios in Florida, but, you know, Georgia's 484 to 1, Louisiana's 468 to 1, Alabama's 453 to 1. So our school counselors have huge caseloads, and that really is not in the best interest of our students. They're not being able to have all of their needs met when, you know, they have limited access to their school counselors because they're having to do so much work for so many people. But even in states like my own, like in South Carolina, where the ratio is in compliance for national guidelines, I mean, we have schools here where we have one counselor that is shared by both the middle and the high school. So it is still an issue. It's not perfect throughout the state. So I think we're all called to do this work and advocate for our students so that we can have, you know, these priorities, you know, and see kind of long-term change. But we're doing a lot of work on the state level, and I want to talk a little bit about that. You know, all of our states have been doing work, and we have state chairs as well as committees. And we call upon volunteers, and we hope many of you who are here today will want to participate, because we are always looking for passionate people to get more involved and make an impact. But these are the great events within your state to really take part in. Some things that we did pre-pandemic that I want to touch on. Alabama has had both breakfasts and luncheons like Po' Boys and Policy, which they gave information. Like David said, you don't have to know everything. If you attend these events, they will provide you with information so you feel like you are given, you know, some key facts and data to have in your back pocket in case you get called on with questions like that. You know, but then they're, you know, able to engage. They have, you know, special speakers. Like I know Alabama has had state representatives like Terry Collins from the House Education Committee that has led into deep discussions, you know, that, you know, further influence some of the decisions they make down the road. South Carolina, you can go ahead and advance the slide, Maria. South Carolina has had days in terms of luncheons where they've talked to over 150 representatives and senators and gotten our policy priorities in their hands. And when you meet in an informal way, like in luncheon, you know, it really allows you to kind of have good conversations and build those relationships, like David said, and offer yourself as a resource. And I know that that is something I have found is, you know, by attending these events and meeting these people and, you know, breaking bread with them, you know, it kind of makes you more confident in your ability to have these types of conversations. And I've been called on later. They've emailed me and called me to ask me questions about upcoming bills. And that's, you know, really important too. This is an example of a legislative day that Louisiana had in 2019. And as you can see, there's lots of different opportunities for us, for our folks to engage with these decision makers, from committee meetings to attending the chamber meetings as well. But we always build in those discussions and information sessions, so I think people feel comfortable in, you know, kind of talking through these issues. Some other things that, you know, I want to briefly touch on that are really easy, kind of low-hanging fruit, but make a major impact are action alerts. We have put out several action alerts just this year. Georgia put out an action alert for need-based aid. They are one of only 2 states in the country right now that does not have need-based aid for their students. Florida put out an action alert to the Board of Governors regarding the test optional policy. And just those 2 action alerts garnered 3,500 signatures. So this allows our representatives to know what we care about. You know, when they're going and they're meeting, you know, at least we have a voice. At least we're letting them know what our opinion and how this impacts the work that we're doing. Other ways, you know, is through, you know, newsletters. A lot of our state chairs put out regular newsletters. NACAC provides lots of different policy and legislation updates if you subscribe to them. So I really encourage that as well. This gives you an example of one of the action alerts that we put out that I mentioned before for Florida. And then we had another one for Georgia. And it's so easy, you know, SACAC just to touch on the Georgia one, we have a coalition of folks. And as David said, some of these are not folks that are on government relations. They just are very passionate about the fact that they need need-based aid for their under-resourced students in that state. And it's a coalition of educators, and they've gotten together and they've formed and they've organized. And one of the things that they did, one of the initiatives they took was to put out an action alert through SACAC and with the help of NACAC and the support of NACAC. And again, like, this is just one more way to kind of get this information out to our membership, but also to kind of influence that change. And then virtually, this year, of course, with the pandemic, we couldn't do a lot of things in person, but there's been a lot going on. Alabama had a great event earlier this year, which with double the participation because it was virtual than what they've seen usually in person in the past few years. And they did that collaboratively with State Area Initiatives Committee. And they had roundtable discussions and breakout rooms. And that was a really great way to learn more about what's impacting your state. South Carolina's hosted 2 legislative panels. They had one last month in March on the state of financial aid in South Carolina. And that was really informative. I mean, South Carolina has a lot of students going to college, but they're not retaining them. And it kind of comes back to the financial barrier. So they were exploring why that is. But South Carolina ranks number 9 in the country for highest tuition, both in-state and out of state, for public schools. But having said that, the median household income is lower than the majority of other states in the US. And state scholarships have not changed in over 20 years. So when you start to see the bigger picture, I think it enables you to have more informed conversations. And again, feel that level of confidence, and I think even be more passionate about these policy priorities. And then Louisiana also hosted a really great day with a special speaker on the state of education in this within their state. And Florida has been doing a lot of Advocacy 101 programming as well. So lots of things still continuing to go on. South Carolina is having another event next Thursday, April 29th. So if you've missed it, you can go ahead and register for that event. But all of these events are also recorded. So, there's lots of opportunities to participate and kind of engage yourself in this type of work.
And I think that's one of the things that we've seen over the course of the last year and a half of the pandemic, is that this has really enabled us to be a little bit more innovative, a little bit more creative in how we are both reaching out to our membership to help us advocate, but also reaching our legislators and being able to make sure that that message is not lost in the ether as we're dealing with everything that has come down from the pandemic. So from a few of my states that I've worked closely with, that I wanted to make sure to hone in on some of their examples as well. Tennessee Legislative Day, taking place in March, actually brought it down to a very introductory level, trying to encourage more participation. As David mentioned, we're always trying to find new ways to engage folks in this conversation, take out that intimidating factor that tends to be there when folks aren't quite as used to working with legislators. And also working more hands-on with some of the nonprofits and non-governmental organizations in the area to help us understand what is going on in our particular state, what are some issues that they've advocated for that may also fall in line with SACAC and NACAC priorities as well. So we've had a couple of great speakers over the last couple of years from those organizations for Tennessee Legislative Day. Likewise, North Carolina advocacy efforts has really put it back into an open forum, town hall conversations, really trying to brainstorm what is some of the more interesting, more important efforts that we need to take action on. And so their particular state chairs have organized these town halls. The next one that's coming up is actually May 14th. So if you are interested in those efforts, if you want to make sure that issues that you're noticing in your institution or with the students that you're trying to recruit to your institution, and make sure that we understand those issues, we encourage you to participate in those town halls. We also have engaged David with helping us understand what are some resources that NACAC can help us provide our legislators in North Carolina to make sure that we're able to engage in that conversation with our Board of Governors for the University of North Carolina system, so that way they understand where we're coming from when we do approach them with those conversations. And then lastly, we certainly talk about Georgia a lot, and that's because of the, again, very unique efforts that they've put into place, but also really it's a mainstay for the state of Georgia to be advocates for their particular students and their particular institutions. So they've also been pretty creative in hosting a number of different webinars that lead up to their legislative day. Just a couple of topics that they've honed in on this year are including financial aid for Georgia students, DACA protections for that particular population, and then focusing on student to counselor ratios using some of the resources that NACAC have enabled us to, again, be able to use, to be able to talk about the importance of lowering that ratio for various counties, various schools, so that way we can make sure that our legislators know just how imperative it is to enact on these. So with that, I believe we had, again, just a couple of grassroots efforts that you can easily participate in during, whether it is, again, virtual formats this given year, or when we are back in person and are able to actually storm the Capitol in very good ways for Day on the Hill and to be able to talk with the legislators in person. We encourage you to do so. We do also have some great ways for you to be a little bit more informed on what's going on within legislative policy. For example, following legislators on social media, being able to really follow think tanks and understand what is going on, whether it's a bill that's stuck in committee at the moment or being presented to the House floor. You want to make sure that you understand where that is in the particular pathway of becoming enacted legislation. And I also encourage you all as counselors, as admissions representatives, to engage with similar organizations. NCAN, ASCA are just a few examples that are out there that are also participating in relevant advocacy work. For example, Doubling the Pell, that was a social media campaign that NCAN led a couple months ago, if I remember correctly, or maybe even a month ago now. That might also be very relevant to our NACAC and SACAC members.
On mute. But, just kind of to like piggyback on that, NACAC Hill Day, as, Maria and David have both spoken about. I've had the opportunity to attend it several times, and there is funding available from SACAC to help folks attend. We do like to have representation from each state, but it's been an amazing experience, and it is my favorite event of the year. I've had lots of opportunities to attend conferences, but I look forward to NACAC Hill Day. It's a great event. You learn a lot. It's lots of fun. And you're on the Capitol meeting with your senators. And I went and met with a senator's aide several years ago. And kind of as David had said before, the student was from my town, or student, the aide was from my town. They're really sometimes very young. And he was excited about it. We kind of built a relationship, and he's emailed me about doing, joint events since then. So those relationships do happen, which is exciting. I met with a representative at a state meeting, and he said to me, "Megan, do I have any DACA students in my high schools?" And it's a really like aha moment to remind yourself that, just because they're in these positions of power and they make a lot of decisions, they don't know everything about the work we do. And this is where we can really help be a resource for them and influence some of those decisions that are being made so that they are in our best interest and our students' best interests. But other ways that, I just want to reiterate, following NACAC on Twitter and, again, subscribing to the updates and alerts is really important. We really want, passionate folks to get involved and participate in our legislative days. If you're motivated, if you aren't afraid maybe even be a squeaky wheel, and you want to solve problems, collaboratively, advocacy is really about finding long-term solutions, and that's what we're here for. And there's no application or anything to be on a state committee. We want you. We want your participation. Run for office. We have a senator that we work with a lot here in South Carolina. He used to be a lobbyist, and he said, you know, I finally realized the best way for me to really make change is to run for office, and he got elected, and he's serving in his second term, you know, and you can make an impact as well. If you are passionate about something, if there are things that come up, you know, reach out to us. We'd love to help you get an action alert together. And put that out to the membership and get some signatures and make sure that we're helping make your voice heard for, you know, for our profession and our students. And then, you know, like I said, you know, host events, financial aid, presentations, college fair, and invite your representatives. Invite them to see the work we do and the folks that we work with, and, you know, start these conversations, you know, on your own turf, so that they can see kind of what we are, the challenges we face every single day. And these are some pictures that I just wanted to share because although, you know, doing the work can take time, and a lot of times seeing these bills come to fruition and seeing these change do take a lot of time, we actually have a lot of fun. As I mentioned before, I mean, Hill Day is a great experience. I know Maria and I had a great time in DC last year. That's a picture of all of us on the left-hand side. And then I have pictures of one of our South Carolina luncheons. And I mean, like I said, I mean, it's casual discussion. I mean, those are folks from both sides of the desk sitting there talking with our state representatives and senators, and going through kind of our core principles and what's important to us. And we're all smiling, you know, it's, you know, we definitely are forming those friendships, and that's what it's really about. If you don't know how to get involved or who to reach out to, we do want to just kind of put up who the state chairs are and who are organizing and implementing this work in your state. We do have some positions for state chairs opening up. So if you want to be more involved on the leadership level, we will have an open position in South Carolina in the coming month. And we have positions available in Mississippi as well. And then always, you know, if you have questions, please reach out to us. I think Maria, though, had a few last minute announcements as well about some other upcoming events.
Really just an additional plug. Again, feel free to catch our NACAC Advocacy Day webinars. They will be posted both, I believe, within NACAC, the membership page, but then also if you, again, had registered for the NACAC conference last September, you should have received an email from Playback Now on how to access those webinars in the coming 24 hours. The other thing is, again, North Carolina is hosting their town hall May 14th. If you are in North Carolina, whether you are a SACAC member or not, we would love to have you attend that town hall. Feel free to email us. We're more than happy to send you the registration link to participate in that particular event. And then South Carolina, Megan, if you have that information.
Yeah, South Carolina is hosting their second legislative panel next Thursday. So I know registration has gone out. But it is open and live. So just as Maria said, if you're a SACAC member or not, we would love to have you tune in for that and get more involved.
And with that, I do want to make sure that we address any questions that are at the end. Deb, I see that you are attending. So yes, we did give a shout out to our May 14th virtual town hall with our North Carolina legislators. So thank you so much for attending and for that additional plug. There are no other questions. We hope that you have taken a lot out of this presentation and certainly are less intimidated about getting involved in advocacy work. We would love to see you participate, whether it is within the SACAC level or the NACAC level. We just kind of want to see your voices out there and participating in these various efforts. Don't feel intimidated. That's the easiest thing, to talk yourself out of these opportunities. But certainly if you need any guidance whatsoever, feel free to reach out to Megan or myself or to any of our state chairs. Thank you all for attending.